London, in the 1890s, a child could buy ice cream in a glass still wet from a stranger's tongue, lick it, and hand it back for the next child. Here is how dessert became a public health nightmare. When people talk about Victorian ice cream, the mind goes soft. Striped awnings, foggy streets, and children grinning over a harmless treat. It sounds lovely. It is also completely too clean. In working-class London of the 1890s, many Italian street sellers offered a penny's worth of sweetness in a tiny reusable glass called a penny lick. You did not keep it. You licked the ice cream straight from the rim, handed the glass back, and the next customer put their mouth exactly where yours had been. Begin with the object, because the penny lick looked too small to be dangerous. It was a thumb-height glass with a thick, cloudy base, a narrow waist, and a flared rim made for lips. For 1 penny, a street seller could press a cheap scoop or smear of ice cream into it and pass it across the cart. The customer ate by licking directly from the glass. There was no paper cup to throw away, no cone to crunch, and no private spoon vanishing into a pocket. When the sweetness was gone, the glass went back to the seller, got whatever rinse a busy pavement business could manage, and was filled again. On a warm afternoon, that cycle turned ugly fast. Horse dust settled on sticky wood. Melted sugar ran down fingers. Children pressed close because a penny treat was rare enough to matter. A cough moved through the line. Someone wiped their mouth on a sleeve. The rim came back wet, cloudy, and sweet. It still looked like dessert, which was the trick. It behaved more like a handshake made with tongues. Victorian street ice cream was eaten through the traces of the street itself. The first shock is that the danger did not arrive looking filthy. It arrived cold, cheap, and delicious. It is tempting to point at the ice cream seller and call him the villain. That feels satisfying, and it is too easy. London's street economy ran on tiny margins. Italian sellers became part of the cheap food landscape because they could offer something almost astonishing for a coin most working children might actually have. A penny lick was not a charming novelty to them. It was a cold, sweet interruption in a crowded day, eaten between errands, school, work, and waiting for adults to stop needing things. The seller needed the glass back because the glass was part of the business. If every customer walked away with the container, the treat could not stay at a penny. So the very thing that kept it affordable also made it grossly intimate. Poverty turned hygiene into a negotiation. How clean can anything be when the queue is impatient, the rinse water is already tired, and every extra second costs money? That is the cruel little machine inside the penny lick. A democratic pleasure built around strangers sharing the same mouth-level object. It does not excuse the risk. It explains why the risk kept being taken, 1 coin and 1 lick at a time. Translate the penny lick into something modern, and the charm evaporates immediately. A food truck sells tiny smoothies in shot glasses. You drink yours, hand the glass back through the window, watch it get a quick splash of water, and then see it pass to the next child in line. There is no dishwasher hum behind the counter. There is no sealed packaging. There is no comfort that the last person was healthy. Suddenly, the cute Victorian treat starts to look like a dare issued by a public health department with a drinking problem. The scale is the part that matters. One shared glass is unpleasant. A shared glass moving through dozens of mouths is a system. Each customer adds moisture, saliva, and whatever illness happens to be along for the ride. Victorian London already feared disease passing through close contact, crowded rooms, shared air, and contaminated surfaces. Scarlet fever and tuberculosis were not abstract words on a poster. They were the kind of illnesses families heard about in rooms they actually lived in. The penny lick concentrated that anxiety into an object small enough for a child's hand. It was not deadly every time, but the arrangement was so obviously risky that the real mystery is how long everyone kept pretending it was normal. But here's the part that makes the whole thing nastier. The penny lick was not a dirty accident. It was a design problem. The glass had to survive being passed around, had to hold a tiny penny portion, and had to return to the cart. Reuse was the feature. The danger was baked into the business model, which is a nauseating sentence when the business is ice cream. If this is the kind of history that ruins dessert for you, subscribe and stay with me, because the past has a remarkable talent for making snacks disgusting. The real fix was not asking every hurried seller to become a flawless sanitation machine on a crowded pavement. Objects had to change. A personal wrapper changes behavior. A disposable cup changes behavior. A cone changes behavior. Once the container belongs to the customer, the chain of mouths breaks. Before that, the seller's rinse was trying to do the work of an entire sanitation system. The process was a dip, a shake, a wipe, and back it went, still cloudy at the rim if the day was busy enough. People could blame careless vendors, but the tiny glass itself kept inviting the same failure. The penny lick did not need a monster to be horrifying. It needed a cue, a warm afternoon, and children with pennies. For children, the penny lick was especially cruel because it offered exactly what childhood wants. Something cold, sweet, public, and just barely affordable. No child saw an epidemiological puzzle sitting on the cart. A child saw other children pressing close, heard pennies click against wood, watched pale ice cream vanish by the lick and wanted a turn. The danger came dressed as belonging. Refusing meant standing outside the tiny ceremony. Children also have a sacred talent for making a treat last far beyond its official lifespan. They do not take one polite taste and retire like miniature gentlemen. They chase every streak. They press their lips to the rim, rotate the glass in sticky fingers, dig into the corners with the tongue, and check the side for one last sweet smear. That is ordinary childhood greed, innocent and completely normal. In a penny lick glass, it was also the perfect delivery system. Parents were left with a miserable little calculation. Say no to the cheapest pleasure on the street while every other child is enjoying it, or say yes and put your faith in a hurried rinse from water that may already have served half the queue. Public health stopped being a slogan. It became a penny in a mitten and a child asking, please. The most unsettling detail is that the penny lick turned politeness inside out. In a modern shop, the cleanest customer is the one who touches almost nothing. With a penny lick, the proper customer put their mouth on the glass and worked at it. You were expected to lick. That was the name, the method, and the reward. So the glass did not carry germs only by bad luck. It invited the most intimate possible contact from strangers who might never share a table, never pass a cup at home, and never lend each other so much as a comb. A well-dressed woman, a coughing laborer, a schoolboy with ink on his fingers, and a toddler with a running nose could all meet at the same rim, separated by a splash of water in a cellar moving too fast to be wholly about standards. The taboo was not merely dirt. It was forced closeness. That is why the penny lick still feels so horribly modern. We can keep old mud, old coal smoke, and old bad plumbing at a comfortable historical distance. Saliva refuses distance. It drags history into the mouth. Suddenly you are not looking at Victorians in stiff photographs. You are realizing that dessert once meant putting your lips where the street had just been. The clearest surviving story is not the sentimental one, because street food rarely leaves us the child with sticky hands and one missing tooth. What survives is the bureaucratic moment, which sounds dull until you remember what the paperwork was staring at. By the end of the 1890s, London councils were no longer treating the penny lick as a slightly nasty habit. They were treating it as a public health problem tied to fears of scarlet fever and tuberculosis. Put that decision in human terms. On one side stood the street seller, often Italian, trying to keep a cheap business alive with portions small enough for a child's coin. The glass had to come back, because the glass was capital. On the other side were officials hearing complaints about children putting their mouths to vessels used by unknown strangers. No dramatic outbreak scene is needed. The evidence was sitting there in plain view. A wet rim, a cloudy bowl, a rushed rinse, another mouth. This is the kind of tiny historical mechanism we keep chasing here. The moment when an ordinary habit becomes too revolting to defend. If you want more everyday objects that turn out to be quietly horrifying, subscribe and stay with me. The penny lick was about to lose its best argument, because the problem was not ice cream. The problem was the container. Here is the irritating part. Once the nausea settles, the penny lick becomes embarrassingly relatable. It is the ancestor of every questionable treat bought because it was cheap, cold, and directly in front of a tired human being. The fairground sweet with fingerprints on the paper, the bargain snack from a stall that looks one sneeze away from collapse, the gas station hot dog spinning under heat lamps like it has legal immunity. Desire is a terrible food inspector. That does not mean Victorian customers were fools. They were living in a city where pleasure often had to be small, immediate, and affordable. Street ice cream was a little miracle. coldness against a sooty mouth, sweetness without a dining room, a moment of celebration loud enough to rise above cartwheels, hooves, and street cries. For a penny, a child could buy a minute of luxury and hand back the evidence. That is what makes the penny lick more than a gross historical fact. If it were only disgusting, the story would be simple. It was disgusting and beloved. Children wanted it. Sellers depended on it. The street accepted it. For 1 coin, you bought sugar, ice, and belonging, served in a cup that later generations would examine and say, with complete fairness, absolutely not. After dark, the penny lick belonged to a different London. The day's errands thinned out. Workers came back through streets that smelled of damp wool, horse dung, coal smoke, and fried things, trying their best. Cheap food became part of the evening conversation. A cart did not need a dining room to create a gathering place. It needed a lamp, a seller's call, a few coins, and the promise of cold sweetness after heat, smoke, or fatigue. That social life is easy to romanticize, because street food always has theater built into it. There was the call, the choosing, the waiting, the first taste, and then the small humiliation of wanting more than your penny could buy. But the same crowd that made the cart lively made the glass worse. By the time it reached the next hand, the penny lick was not starting fresh. It had a past. Night sharpened the trust problem. You could not inspect a rinse with scientific confidence under gaslight. You could not know who had used the vessel before you, or what cough had just been politely swallowed. So I am genuinely curious. Would you have taken the lick if every child around you was doing it, and you had the penny ready? Tell me in the comments. The street did not wait for certainty. It kept serving. Disease was the fear that finally made the penny lick almost impossible to defend. Scarlet fever and tuberculosis were not abstract labels to Victorian families. They were the kind of illnesses that changed the sound of a house. A cough became a warning. A hot child in bed became a family emergency. When people worried about a glass traveling from mouth to mouth, they were not being fussy little hygiene aristocrats. They were responding to real terror. What makes the penny lick so revealing is that it sits between older habits and modern public health. A seller might honestly believe a quick rinse was reasonable. A customer might trust the coldness of the ice, the clear shine of the glass, or the soothing fact that everyone else in the queue seemed fine. But the practical evidence kept returning to the same ugly point. Shared mouth contact was dangerous. Public health did not have to wait for every person on the pavement to become a medical expert. It could look at the arrangement and say, the structure is the problem. The street, the price, the reusable glass, the tired rinse water, and the waiting queue created a risk private common sense could not reliably solve. If you like history where the villain is a tiny object with terrible social consequences, subscribe and keep watching. Hygiene was becoming a system, whether the penny lick liked it or not. The uncomfortable part is that the penny lick is not as extinct as our smug modern brains want it to be. We still make hygiene bargains all day. We tap sticky shared screens, drink from office mugs whose history is basically folklore, eat from counters we have not inspected, and trust strangers to wash what we cannot see. The penny lick feels grotesque because the wet rim is visible. The logic behind it, convenience beating invisible risk, is alive and thriving. So here is the real question. If you were in 1890s London short on money, with a child watching every other child get that cold, sweet mouthful, would you forbid the glass, or would you hand over the penny and hope the seller's rinse was good enough? Tell me in the comments, because the honest answer is much uglier than the clean answer. Everyone likes to believe they would be the sensible exception, standing nobly between their family and the communal dessert saliva. But public health rarely arrives while everyone is being noble. It arrives after a risky habit has become ordinary, cheap, and socially awkward to refuse. At the time, the warning can sound like fussing, interference, or someone trying to ruin a small pleasure. That tension is not uniquely Victorian. It is human. We are still negotiating it every time convenience whispers that it is probably fine. What finally beat the penny lick was not a more virtuous customer, or a miracle rinse, or a council inspector with superhuman patience. It was a container nobody had to bring back. That is the quiet genius of the cone. A cone does not need to be returned, rinsed, stacked wet in a grim little row, inspected under weak light, or trusted after one stranger after another has had a turn. It leaves with the customer. Better still, it disappears into the same mouth that used it. That sounds laughably obvious now, but it was a radical little fix. Instead of trying to purify a glass between strangers on a busy pavement, the cone removed the shared surface altogether. The hygiene problem did not get a lecture. It got redesigned. The seller could keep the cheap portable pleasure. The customer could keep the public ritual of licking ice cream while walking through noise, coal grit, and cart traffic. The council could stop chasing a damp glass that kept reappearing in fresh hands. The cone changed the feeling, too. The penny lick's message was hurry up, return the vessel, and do not think too hard about the previous mouth. The cone's message was simple. This serving belongs to you. That tiny emotional upgrade helps explain why street ice cream survived the death of its nastiest serving method. Cleanliness arrived through ownership. The treat did not have to vanish. It just needed a shape no stranger had already licked. The fair thing to say is that Victorian street ice cream was more than one long parade of terrible choices. People around the penny lick were solving real problems with the tools they had, even when the tools included a sticky little glass that makes your jaw tighten. Italian sellers helped put a cold, sweet treat within reach of people who could not afford to sit in expensive rooms or order elaborate desserts. Customers took pleasure where the city allowed it, often in small, noisy bites between work, errands, smoke, and rain. And the councils, once the danger became hard to ignore, did something genuinely useful. They treated a tiny everyday habit as worth regulating. Public health often looks dramatic in hindsight, but it is usually built from dull, practical moves. Ban the shared glass. Change the container. Make the safer choice the easier one. That is not primitive. That is how sane systems work. The clever part is that they did not have to wait for every child, parent, and seller to become a perfect little germ theorist on the pavement. They changed the arrangement so fewer people had to be perfect. If this kind of filthy object history is exactly your flavor, subscribe, because the everyday things people loved, feared, banned, and reinvented are usually where the best trouble is hiding. The penny lick was revolting. The response to it was smarter than we give them credit for. So the next time someone sighs over the romance of old London, remember the ice cream glass. Remember the child with a penny, the seller trying to earn a living from a cart, the council worrying over scarlet fever and tuberculosis, and that tiny wet rim traveling politely from mouth to mouth. History has beautiful shop fronts, gaslight, music halls, and all the usual sepia bait. It also has objects we are very lucky to have outgrown. The penny lick is funny until you give it 2 seconds of honest thought. Then it becomes a perfect little lesson. Progress sometimes looks like a cone. Sometimes it looks like a ban, a disposable container, or the quiet agreement that strangers should not share dessert by saliva. If you've been standing there, penny in hand, would you have risked one lick for a mouthful of sweetness? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy history that ruins ordinary objects in the best possible way, subscribe before the next one ruins your kitchen. Of all the Victorian inventions people get misty about, the communal ice cream tongue glass should not be one of them, not even close.